Welcome, dear friends. Let me tell you a story of love's resilience, of two souls who endured unimaginable hardship and injustice, only to have fate grant them a second chance at happiness. This is a tale of pain, betrayal, and redemption, of how true love can rise from the ashes of despair. Our story begins with Michael Donovan, a man whose wealth and power are as vast as his cruelty. In his lavish penthouse, Michael is consumed by rage, his face flushed red, veins bulging as he holds a manila envelope in his hand. Inside are photos that will ignite a storm of fury. He bellows for his wife, Emma, demanding an explanation, his voice echoing through the walls with a menacing intensity. The woman he calls to, once bright and hopeful, now enters the room with dread in her heart. Emma Donovan, a woman who has known nothing but sorrow since being bound to Michael, steels herself for the confrontation. The photos he shoves in her face reveal a tender moment between her and another man, Liam, an ambulance driver at the hospital where she volunteers. The bouquet of daisies in her hands, the happiness on her face, are in stark contrast to the life she leads with Michael. She cannot deny her connection with Liam, though nothing improper has happened between them. Yet, her affection for him is undeniable. Michael's rage is the culmination of years of control and dominance over Emma, a marriage forced upon her when she was at her most vulnerable. 12 years earlier, Emma's life had shattered with the tragic death of her father. Struggling under a mountain of debt, she was left with no options, and Michael had offered her an escape, at a terrible price. He had cleared her debts in exchange for her hand in marriage, trapping her in a loveless union. Now, faced with his fury and the threat of losing everything once again, Emma knows that Michael will stop at nothing to punish her and Liam for their bond. But what he doesn't know is that this love, forged in hardship, has the strength to endure far more than he can imagine. Michael Donovan stormed into the penthouse suite, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, veins bulging at his temples as he clutched a manila envelope in one white-knuckled hand. His entire body shook with the effort to contain the fury that was bubbling just beneath the surface. The luxurious surroundings of the penthouse, marble floors, grand chandeliers, and panoramic city views, felt oppressive, suffocating under the weight of his rage. "Emma! Get your lying, cheating self in here right now," he roared, his voice reverberating through the spacious room like the clap of thunder. Spittle flew from his mouth as he called for his wife, demanding her presence with a wrath that could shatter glass. Emma Donovan entered the room slowly, her movements cautious and her back rigid with fear. She had learned long ago how to read the signs of Michael's temper, and today was one of those days, a day when the storm would come, and there would be no stopping it. Her silk robe felt like a fragile barrier, providing no protection from the torrent that was about to descend upon her. As she stepped forward, her hands trembled slightly, unconsciously smoothing the folds of the robe as if trying to calm her fraying nerves. Michael's eyes narrowed into slits as he stared her down, breathing heavily, his nostrils flaring like a bull ready to charge. Without a word, he tore open the envelope and pulled out a stack of glossy photos, throwing the envelope aside carelessly. With a violent thrust, he shoved the photos in Emma's face, nearly smacking her with them. "Care to explain just what the hell this is?" he snarled, his voice low and venomous, the kind of tone that sent chills down Emma's spine. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she glanced at the images. There, in vivid color, were photos of her outside the hospital where she volunteered, standing close to a man, Liam Carter, an ambulance driver she had befriended. He was smiling, handing her a bouquet of daisies, her favorite flower, while her face lit up with a warmth and happiness that had become foreign to her in recent years. The photos captured a moment of light in her otherwise dark existence, and now, that light was about to be snuffed out by Michael's fury. "Well?" Michael's harsh tone snapped her out of her reverie, the joy of that fleeting memory dissolving under his seething anger. "Who is he? What's his profession? Start talking." His voice grew louder with every word, pushing Emma closer to the edge of panic. Emma opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her mind raced, her heart pounded, and she felt the world closing in around her. She knew she should tell him the truth, that Liam was a kind man she had met at the hospital, that he worked tirelessly saving lives, and that over time, she had developed feelings for him. But the truth was a weapon in Michael's hands, and she feared the explosion that would come if she dared speak it. Michael's patience snapped. He grabbed a fistful of Emma's robe and yanked her forward, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and reeking of fury. "I'm waiting," he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper, though it carried the weight of 100 unspoken threats. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, memories flooding back, memories of how she had ended up trapped in this gilded cage with a man who saw her as nothing more than a possession. 12 years ago, Emma had been a different person, young, hopeful, and full of dreams. But all of that had changed in an instant, the day her father had been killed in a horrific accident. A semi-truck had barreled through a red light and smashed into his sedan with such force that his body was unrecognizable. The medical bills, the funeral expenses, they piled up faster than Emma could breathe. As a struggling artist, she had no means to cover the astronomical costs. She was drowning in debt, on the verge of losing everything. And that's when Michael had entered her life, like a serpent slithering through the grass, sensing her vulnerability. He had always made her uncomfortable with his lingering stares and inappropriate comments, but when he made his proposal, Emma was too desperate to refuse. He would pay all of her debts, every last penny, but there was a price: Emma would become his wife. She would belong to him, body and soul, to do with as he pleased. At first, Emma had been appalled, but as the bills mounted and the pressure grew, she realized she had no choice. Michael had made it clear that refusing him could have deadly consequences for her and anyone she cared about. He had hinted, darkly, that her father's accident might not have been an accident at all. Terrified and trapped, Emma had agreed, and so began her life as Michael Donovan's wife, his purchased plaything. Now, all these years later, she was standing in front of him once more, being torn apart by his rage, the same rage that had controlled her for over a decade. His grip on her robe tightened as his eyes bored into her. "Tell me the truth, Emma," he demanded, his voice a dangerous growl. Emma swallowed hard, knowing she had to speak. His name is Liam," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "He's an ambulance driver. We met at the hospital." She couldn't bring herself to look at Michael's face, but she felt his cold, contemptuous smile as he absorbed the information. "An ambulance driver," he sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. "How precious. And what did you think? That the two of you could run off into the sunset together? He can't give you what I can, Emma. He's nothing." Emma felt her stomach churn at the way he spoke, reducing her feelings to nothing more than an object to be owned or discarded. But she had to keep going, had to confess before things escalated even further. "I've developed feelings for him," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But we've never been physical, I swear it." Michael's face twisted in fury, and before she could react, he grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back violently. "You stupid, ungrateful," he roared, his words lost in the torrent of rage as he shook her. Emma cried out in pain, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. Please, Michael, I'm so sorry." He released her with a shove, sending her stumbling backward. "You'll be sorry all right," he growled, turning on his heel and storming out of the room. "I'll make sure of that." As the door slammed shut behind him, Emma collapsed to the floor, trembling in fear. She knew Michael would exact his revenge, and she knew exactly who he would target next. In the stark contrast to the cold, unrelenting world of Michael Donovan's penthouse, Emma had found a rare glimpse of warmth and light at City Hospital, where she spent her time volunteering. It was a place of refuge for her, a sanctuary away from the oppressive life she endured at home. And it was here, amid the clatter of stretchers and the quiet hum of life-saving machinery, that she met Liam Carter. Liam wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention when he entered a room. He wasn't like Michael, with his dominating presence and towering ego. Instead, Liam had a quiet strength, the kind that revealed itself in moments of kindness and compassion. He was an ambulance driver, always on the front lines, always there in the critical minutes between life and death. He had a steady demeanor and a heart that extended far beyond the uniform he wore. For someone like Emma, whose life had been so devoid of genuine care, Liam's warmth was like a breath of fresh air. Their friendship began in the most innocent of ways. Liam had noticed Emma during one of his regular runs to the hospital. She was always there, volunteering her time with a gentle smile and a quiet determination to help those in need. He admired her from a distance at first, sensing the sadness that lingered behind her eyes. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling shift, Liam had stopped by the nurse's station where Emma was restocking supplies. "Rough day?" Emma had asked softly, her voice kind but not intrusive. Liam had looked at her, surprised at the concern in her tone. He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, but they're all like that, aren't they?" Emma smiled faintly, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I suppose they are. But you're always so calm. You make it look easy." Liam chuckled, a sound that was more tired than amused. "Trust me, it's not easy. Well, you do what you can, right? Every day's a fight to help someone make it to tomorrow." That simple conversation had been the beginning. Over time, they began talking more, sharing brief moments during their busy days. They'd exchange smiles or a few words in passing, but those small interactions became the highlights of Emma's otherwise bleak existence. Liam's presence was comforting, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. As their connection deepened, Emma began to notice things about Liam that filled her with a bittersweet longing: his quiet determination, his unassuming bravery, the way he would laugh softly at a joke one of the nurses made, or the tenderness in his voice when he spoke to the patients. He embodied everything that was good and pure in a world that, for her, had become twisted and dark. Then, one evening, after a particularly long day, Emma was sitting outside the hospital, enjoying a rare moment of peace. The spring air was warm, and for once, her mind wasn't consumed by thoughts of Michael's controlling hand or the gilded cage she lived in. She had her eyes closed, simply breathing in the night air, when she felt someone sit down beside her. She opened her eyes to find Liam there, holding a modest bouquet of daisies. Her favorite flower. "I thought you could use these," he said, offering her the flowers with a shy smile. "I see you here every day, and I know it's not easy. You deserve something nice." Emma stared at the flowers, her heart swelling with emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. She took the bouquet carefully, cradling it in her hands as if it were the most precious thing she'd ever received. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Liam smiled, and for a moment, the world faded away. In that brief exchange, there was no Michael, no suffocating fear or oppression, only the simple, pure kindness of one person reaching out to another. It was in that moment that Emma felt something shift inside her, something long buried stirring to life again. As the days went on, Emma found herself looking forward to the moments she shared with Liam. He became a lifeline, someone she could talk to, even if only about the most mundane things. She didn't tell him about her marriage or the horror she faced at home, how could she? But Liam seemed to sense that Emma carried a heavy burden, and he never pressed her for more than she was willing to share. Slowly but surely, her feelings for Liam began to grow, though she fought hard to suppress them. How could she let herself care for him when she was trapped in a marriage to a man like Michael? It was wrong, wasn't it? She was Michael's wife, bound to him by a terrible choice she'd made years ago. And yet, every time Liam smiled at her, or handed her a cup of coffee after a long shift, or asked how her day was going, Emma's heart swelled with a love she hadn't felt in years. She told herself over and over that it couldn't go anywhere. She and Liam could never be together, not with the chains of her marriage holding her back. But despite her best efforts, Emma couldn't stop the feelings that grew inside her. In Liam, she saw a future, one where she was free from Michael's cruelty, one where she could finally breathe again. But deep down, Emma knew that such a future was an impossible dream. Michael would never let her go, and if he ever found out about Liam, he would destroy them both. The stakes were too high, and the risks too great. And yet, in those quiet moments at the hospital, when it was just the two of them, Emma allowed herself to dream. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear and despair. She allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to be with someone like Liam, someone who cared for her, not as a possession, but as a person. But dreams, as beautiful as they are, can be dangerous. And in Emma's case, her secret love for Liam would soon come with a price. A price she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. Michael Donovan's fury was far from contained after Emma's reluctant confession. As soon as she revealed Liam's name, Michael's mind shifted gears from rage to cold, calculated vengeance. He stormed out of the penthouse, leaving Emma crumpled on the floor, her body trembling from the violent confrontation. She knew with terrifying certainty that Michael wasn't going to let this betrayal go unpunished. His parting words, "I'll make sure of that," echoed in her mind, filling her with dread. 3 days passed in agonizing silence, with Emma on edge, waiting for the inevitable fallout. She knew how vindictive Michael could be, how he relished exerting his power over others. He had always controlled every aspect of her life, and now he would turn that power against Liam, the only man who had ever shown her genuine kindness. Then came the call that shattered her fragile world. It was her friend Emily, a nurse at City Hospital, her voice frantic with disbelief. "Emma, you need to come to the hospital. It's about Liam." Emma's heart plummeted, a cold wave of dread washing over her. She rushed to the hospital, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. When she arrived, Emily met her at the entrance, her face pale and filled with concern. "They've arrested him, Emma," she said breathlessly. "Liam's been charged with drug trafficking." Emma nearly collapsed at the news, her knees buckling as the weight of it hit her. Drug trafficking? It was impossible. She knew Liam, his honesty, his dedication to helping others. He wasn't capable of something like that. But as Emily explained, the story became clearer, and more horrifying. Liam had been arrested after an ambulance he was driving was found loaded with illegal narcotics. Emma's stomach turned. She knew this was Michael's doing. It had all the markings of his vengeance. He must have planted the drugs, orchestrating a setup so elaborate that it left no room for doubt. It was a calculated strike, designed to ruin Liam's life in the most devastating way possible. Tears filled Emma's eyes as the reality of it sank in. Michael had done this, he had destroyed Liam just as easily as he had destroyed her years ago. All because she had dared to care for someone else, dared to hope for a future outside of Michael's control. "What can I do?" Emma asked, her voice shaky with desperation. She wanted to help, but she felt powerless, trapped in a web that Michael had woven so tightly around her and Liam. Emily shook her head sadly. "There's nothing you can do. The charges are serious, Emma. They've already taken him into custody." As Emily's words sank in, Emma felt her world darken. Michael had taken everything from her, and now he had destroyed Liam too. The man she had fallen in love with was being punished for crimes he didn't commit. All Emma could do was stand there, helpless and broken, as Michael's vengeance unraveled the last thread of hope she had left. The years that followed were the darkest of Emma's life. After Liam's arrest, everything unraveled swiftly. Despite her desperate attempts to prove his innocence, Michael's influence was far-reaching. He had connections in every corner of the legal system, and with the power of his wealth, he ensured that Liam was convicted of drug trafficking. The charges were fabricated, the evidence planted, but it didn't matter. Liam was sentenced to 25 years in prison for a crime he hadn't committed. Emma's own fate was sealed shortly after. Michael, never satisfied with merely punishing Liam, had her framed as an accessory. She too was charged, accused of conspiring to traffic drugs alongside Liam. Though her sentence was much lighter, 5 years, it was enough to destroy her life. Emma was marked permanently as a criminal, her future in ruins. She no longer had any hope of regaining the life she once dreamed of. When Emma was finally released from prison, she returned to a world that had forgotten her. Her once promising future as an artist was gone, and she found herself with no opportunities and nowhere to go. The stigma of her conviction followed her like a shadow, and the few places willing to hire her paid her just enough to survive. She ended up as a janitor at City Hospital, the very place where her life had intersected with Liam's years before. Every day felt like a reminder of her failure, of the love she had lost, and the freedom that had been ripped away from her. The hospital was a place of healing for others, but for Emma, it had become a prison of its own. She scrubbed floors, cleaned bathrooms, and performed menial tasks, all while feeling the weight of the years of injustice pressing down on her shoulders. She no longer dreamed of escape. Her spirit was crushed under the burden of her past, and the vibrant woman she once had been was now a ghost. It wasn't just the physical toll of the labor that wore her down, it was the emotional scars that hadn't healed. The memories of Liam's arrest haunted her. She saw his face everywhere, his kind eyes, his gentle smile. She remembered the warmth he had brought into her life, the way he had made her feel human again. And now, he was locked away, his life stolen, because of her connection to him. She blamed herself for his fate, for allowing Michael to tear them apart. Years passed in a blur of monotony, one indistinguishable from the next. The seasons changed, but Emma's life remained static. Her once vibrant auburn hair was now streaked with gray, her youthful features weathered by hardship. The dreams of her youth, of love, of a family, of a career filled with meaning, were now nothing more than distant memories. The hospital, ironically, was also the place where Emma had once felt hope. It was the place where she and Liam had first connected, where they had shared those brief moments of light amid the darkness. But now, every hallway, every room felt like a reminder of what had been taken from her. She walked those halls every day, scrubbing floors that never seemed to get clean, trapped in a cycle of labor that mirrored the prison she felt in her soul. Despite everything, Emma had learned to live with the weight of her past. She had resigned herself to a life of obscurity, a life without the love or freedom she had once longed for. She no longer believed in second chances. The world had turned its back on her, and she had accepted her place on the fringes of society. But fate, as cruel as it had been, wasn't finished with Emma yet. One fateful day, an event would unfold in the hospital that would reignite the flicker of hope she had buried deep inside. It would come as a shock, a jolt to the system, something she never thought possible. And once again, her life would be thrust into turmoil, but this time, there was a chance for redemption, for love to rise from the ashes. What Emma didn't know was that this time, she wasn't going to lose everything. This time, fate was about to deal her a different hand. A hand that would give her the opportunity to fight back against the years of injustice, and perhaps, reclaim the life and love she thought had been lost forever. The day that changed everything for Emma began like any other. She was scrubbing the dingy tiles in one of the hospital's bathrooms, the monotony of her routine numbing her mind. The mop moved mechanically in her hand, back and forth, as she tried not to think about the years of her life she had spent doing this. Cleaning. Existing. Surviving. She had become accustomed to the quiet humiliation of it all. No longer did she feel the sting of how far she had fallen, from a once promising artist to a convicted felon and janitor. She was simply going through the motions, lost in a life that had long ceased to hold any meaning. But then, the bathroom door burst open, breaking the trance of her routine. A team of paramedics rushed in, wheeling in a stretcher with a battered, bloodied figure laid out on it. Emma's heart lurched as she caught sight of the man on the stretcher. His clothes were tattered, his beard unkempt, his face bruised and swollen beyond recognition. But there was something about him, something familiar that made her pulse quicken in her chest. "No ID, no pulse," one of the medics said, shaking his head. "He was hit by a car downtown. Looks homeless. We're calling it." Emma dropped the mop and pushed through the medics, her heart racing, ignoring their scowls as she stared at the man on the stretcher. It couldn't be. After all these years? Could it really be him? She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the features that, despite the injuries and the years, were burned into her memory. It was Liam. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen him in over a decade, not since that awful day when he had been arrested, when their lives had been torn apart. But she knew, even beneath the layers of blood and grime, that this was him. She would recognize him anywhere. Without waiting for permission, Emma sprang into action. She shoved her way to the side of the stretcher, positioning herself over Liam's body. Her hand shook as she tilted his head back and pinched his nose, sealing her lips over his cold, blue ones. She began breathing into him, desperate, panicked breaths, as she recalled the CPR training she had received years before. "Come on, Liam," she whispered between breaths. "Don't you dare leave me now." "Not again." The paramedic stood back, watching in disbelief as this frail, haggard janitor fought desperately to revive the man they had written off. Emma continued, refusing to give up, willing Liam to come back to life. And then, after what felt like an eternity, his chest convulsed, and a rasping breath escaped his lips. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she cupped his whiskered cheek. "It's me, Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's Emma. You're alive." Though his mind was clouded, something flickered in Liam's eyes. Recognition. His chapped lips parted, and he tried to speak, but only a hoarse croak came out. One of the medics finally snapped out of his stupor, gently pulling Emma away from Liam. "Lady, do you know this guy?" Emma nodded furiously, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "Yes, we have a history. A long one." As the paramedics wheeled Liam away for further treatment, Emma stood in the hallway, her legs trembling. Her heart was pounding in her chest, a mix of shock, joy, and fear coursing through her veins. She had saved him, brought him back from the brink of death, but what now? What would become of them after all this time? As Emma stood there, watching the stretcher disappear down the hallway, a voice called her name from behind. "Emma Donovan?" She turned slowly and found herself face to face with a tall, graying man in an immaculately tailored suit. He looked familiar, but it took a moment for her to place him. When she did, her breath caught in her throat. It was Dr. Carter, the head of the hospital board, and the man whose mother she had helped deliver years ago. Emma flushed with embarrassment, acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance, her janitor's uniform stained with cleaning supplies and sweat. The last time she had seen Dr. Carter, she had been a bright, young volunteer, filled with hope and ambition. Now, she was a shadow of that person. "I didn't expect you to remember me," Emma said, her voice small. Dr. Carter smiled kindly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "How could I forget? You were the brave young woman who stayed by my mother's side during a very difficult birth. She still talks about you to this day." His smile faded as he looked her over, his eyes filled with concern. "But what has happened to you, Emma? I didn't expect to find you here, in this situation." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. She had spent years burying her pain, pushing it deep inside, never speaking of the horrors she had endured. But now, with Dr. Carter standing before her, his genuine concern breaking through her hardened exterior, the dam cracked. The words came pouring out, her disastrous marriage to Michael, the way he had manipulated and trapped her, the cruel framing of Liam, her own imprisonment, and the years of injustice that had followed. By the time she finished, Dr. Carter's face was ashen with shock and outrage. "My God, Emma," he murmured, shaking his head. "I had no idea. No wonder you've been hiding in the shadows all these years. What that man did to you, it's unforgivable." Emma shrugged, her eyes downcast. "It doesn't matter anymore. It's all in the past." "No," Dr. Carter said firmly. "It does matter. You don't deserve to live in the shadows, not after everything you've been through. And as for Liam, this grave injustice cannot be allowed to stand any longer." Emma blinked, barely daring to hope. "What do you mean?" Dr. Carter placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're coming with me. We're going to get you and Liam the legal representation you deserve. We're going to clear your names and right this terrible wrong." For the first time in years, a glimmer of hope flickered in Emma's heart. Could it really be possible? Could she and Liam finally find justice after all the suffering they had endured? 2 weeks later, the front page of the Daily Bugle splashed across every newsstand in the city. The headline read, "Billionaire Dead in Freak Accident, Michael Donovan Killed in Mansion Explosion." Emma sat at her small kitchen table, the newspaper clutched in her hands, her eyes scanning the article in disbelief. According to the report, Michael had been killed instantly when the furnace in his mansion had exploded, leveling half the home. The article speculated about faulty maintenance, but the truth didn't matter. Michael Donovan, the man who had caused her and Liam so much pain, was gone. But that wasn't the only bombshell. The article went on to explain that because Michael had died without legal heirs or a written will, his vast fortune, over $2 billion in assets, was to be awarded to Emma as his surviving spouse. Emma's hands trembled as she tried to wrap her mind around the staggering figure. After all these years of hardship, all the suffering, she was now a billionaire. She had been handed a fortune that had once represented everything she hated, a fortune built on greed, cruelty, and corruption. But now, it could become something else. It could become her second chance. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Emma opened it to find Dr. Carter standing there, along with his mother, the renowned attorney, Elaine Jarvis. "We did it," Elaine said gently, a smile on her face. "You and Liam have been fully exonerated. Your records have been wiped clean." Emma felt a wave of relief so powerful she could barely breathe. She had been waiting for this moment for years, for the chance to finally be free. 6 months had passed since Emma Donovan's world was turned upside down once again. It was still hard for her to believe how drastically her life had changed in such a short amount of time. She had gone from scrubbing floors in City Hospital to owning one of the grandest estates in the country. The sprawling Donovan mansion, once a symbol of her imprisonment under Michael's control, had been completely transformed. It gleamed with fresh paint, the gardens were meticulously landscaped, and the inside had been renovated from top to bottom, stripping away any traces of Michael's dark influence. But more important than the material wealth, more than the billions of dollars she had unexpectedly inherited, was the fact that she was free, truly free, for the first time in over 20 years. And not just her. Liam, too, had been exonerated, his name cleared of the trumped-up charges that had stolen a decade of his life. The man who had once been broken by injustice was now standing tall again, healthier and more vibrant than Emma had ever seen him. Today was a special day. Emma stood in the garden, taking in the view of the lush greenery and vibrant flowers that surrounded her. The warm afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden glow, and the scent of roses and freshly cut grass filled the air. In the center of the garden, a beautifully decorated gazebo stood, adorned with white and lavender ribbons. A towering wedding cake sat on a table nearby, its intricate icing work a testament to the care and attention that had gone into every detail of the day. Emma's heart swelled with emotion as she admired the scene. She still couldn't believe that this was her life now, that after everything, she and Liam were finally going to be husband and wife. It was a dream they had both given up on long ago, snatched away by Michael's cruelty. But now, after years of separation, hardship, and unimaginable loss, they were standing on the brink of a new beginning, a fresh start, free from the chains of the past. As she stood there, lost in thought, Liam appeared at her side, his hand slipping into hers. She turned to him, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the sight of him. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his hair neatly combed, and his eyes filled with a warmth that never failed to make her feel safe. "You ready for this?" Liam asked, his Texas drawl as soft and steady as ever, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Emma nodded, her heart overflowing with love for the man standing beside her. "I still can't believe this is really happening," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "After everything we've been through." Liam squeezed her hand, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "You deserve this, Emma. You deserve happiness. No more suffering, no more pain. Just you, me, and the life we always dreamed of." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she leaned into him, resting her head against his broad chest. For so many years, she had carried the weight of her past on her shoulders, the guilt and the shame, the fear and the heartache. But now, standing here with Liam, she felt lighter than she had in decades. The future, once so dark and uncertain, now stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. "I love you, Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "More than you'll ever know." Liam wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "And I love you, Emma. Always have, always will." The sound of guests arriving in the garden pulled them out of their quiet moment. Dr. Carter and his mother, Elaine, were the first to approach, beaming with pride as they made their way over to the couple. Dr. Carter had played an instrumental role in helping them clear their names, and Emma would be forever grateful for his kindness and persistence. Elaine, the brilliant attorney who had fought tooth and nail to overturn their wrongful convictions, had become a dear friend to Emma as well. "You two look absolutely radiant," Dr. Carter said warmly, shaking Liam's hand before turning to Emma. "It's about time the world saw you both for who you really are, not as victims, but as survivors." Elaine nodded in agreement. "This is a day for celebration, for both of you. A new chapter, a new beginning." Emma smiled, feeling the truth of those words deep in her heart. It was a new beginning, one that had been a long time coming. As more guests arrived, friends, old acquaintances, and people who had supported them along the way, Emma and Liam exchanged hugs and greetings, their joy spreading like sunlight through the crowd. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and warmth, a far cry from the cold, oppressive gatherings that had once taken place in this very same mansion when Michael had ruled over it. Today, the space felt alive, brimming with hope and love. Finally, it was time for the ceremony. Emma and Liam stood beneath the gazebo, hand in hand, as the officiant began to speak. The words seemed to blur in Emma's ears as she looked up at Liam, her heart pounding with anticipation and joy. This moment felt like a culmination of everything they had fought for, the love they had nurtured, the trials they had endured, and the freedom they had finally reclaimed. "Do you, Liam Carter, take Emma Donovan to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, as long as you both shall live?" Liam's eyes never left hers as he smiled, the love and devotion in his gaze overwhelming. "I do," he said, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Emma Donovan, take Liam Carter to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, as long as you both shall live?" Emma's throat tightened with emotion as she looked into Liam's eyes. "I do," she whispered, her voice full of conviction. The officiant smiled warmly. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Without hesitation, Liam pulled Emma into his arms, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was filled with all the love, the longing, and the hope they had carried with them for so many years. The crowd erupted into applause, cheers ringing out as Emma and Liam finally sealed their union. As they pulled apart, tears of joy streamed down Emma's cheeks. She looked around at the faces of those who had gathered to witness this moment, all of them smiling, celebrating the happiness that had been so long denied to her and Liam. For so many years, she had felt like a prisoner, trapped by Michael's control, by the injustice of their wrongful convictions, by the overwhelming weight of her past. But now, standing here with Liam, surrounded by love and support, she felt free. Free to love. Free to live. Free to start over. The night wore on, and the garden transformed into a magical space filled with twinkling lights and music. Emma and Liam danced under the stars, their movements slow and graceful, their hearts full. Around them, their friends and loved ones laughed and celebrated, the joy of the day spreading through the air like a bomb. As the evening drew to a close, Emma and Liam stood at the edge of the garden, looking out over the estate that was now theirs. It no longer felt like a place of pain and confinement, but a place of rebirth, of hope. The mansion, once a symbol of Michael's tyranny, had been transformed into a home where Emma and Liam could build their future together. "I can't believe we're finally here," Emma said softly, her head resting on Liam's shoulder. "It feels like a dream." Liam kissed the top of her head, his arms wrapped around her. "It's real, Emma. It's our life now. And no one can ever take it away from us again." Together, they stood there, watching the last of the sun dip below the horizon, the promise of a new beginning shining brightly before them. A future where they were free to live, to love, and to find happiness, together, always.